The views and opinions.
Welcome to the Hard Time Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Motherfucker Welder. I'm a sergeant somewhere in the American Southwest in an undisclosed location. I just passed my 10-year anniversary. Had my 10-year review, so that was interesting. Sat down with administration, went over, last 10 years, especially the last year, and the goal for the next year is to get better with timekeeping. One of the things I do is work with the time clock. So I have to mess with people's time, people's vacation, people's money, people's time to make sure they get paid. So one of many duties that we have, but switching to days, it's something that I have to do a lot more of. So that's my latest and greatest at work, doing that. Had a little bit of a shakeup at work. We had somebody leave. Our person that did the training cadre has changed. So now I'm actually the most senior sergeant that we have, because our sergeant of 16 years is moving over to do the training, to take that over. And so that leaves me as the most senior sergeant with the most years, most experience on day shift. He'll be working days, so I'll still be able to pick his brain every once in a while when I need to. Not that happens a ton, but it's nice. He's a nice resource to have when I need it, to ask him what's going on, what would be, what we might need in a certain situation. Things come up here and there, different situations. I'll be doing some of the timekeeping and stuff with him, because he's really good at it, rather than, going over with the bookkeepers. I could go down and they have like a class that I can take that shows you, like, this is what you do in this situation, this is what you do in that situation. What do you do if somebody works over, but then, they take time off, or call off, or whatever, what have you? How does that work? How does one thing cancel the other thing out? Boring shit like that. That's part of my daily life now, being on days. So it's been interesting. Dealt with a couple difficult members of the public lately. One family member of an inmate that everybody had problems with, including the local judges, local sheriff, has had a lot of problems with this guy. I've interacted with him a couple times and never had a serious problem with him. Just looked him in the eye, told him what was up, said, this is what this is what's going to happen. This is what we need. Pretty matter of fact. And that was that. It wasn't a super huge deal. And I guess, I keep hearing stories about this dude. He's going off on people and making threats and doing all this stuff. So I was discussing it with some of the officers that, he went off on another sergeant again. And I'm like, I just don't get it. I've interacted with this dude before, never had like the major problems. And they're like, well, you're you just, you present tough but cool, and just, like threatening but not threatening. And people just respond to that, I guess. So I don't know. It's been interesting to see how people respond to me on, dealing with the public on days. I guess there's been mostly good reports from people, which is nice. So there's a few people that basically can go fuck themselves, that I've politely told them to go to hell. They can't do their fucking jobs. Funny story, we did have I feel bad for him. The transport drama continues. same agency that we had before that showed up at the wrong place. This last week, I get a call from a lieutenant, not a captain this time. Lieutenant is about halfway to our facility, so about hour and a half, 2 hours out, and neglected to grab any shackles. So you need three things for a transport. You need paperwork, so you know who you need, where you're going, your directions, and you have the legal authority to do what you need to do. You need an inmate, and you need fucking shackles to control that inmate. And they were critically missing the shackles. So I told him, I'm like, I got to get approval for it, but I'm sure you need fucking shackles. We're going to have to make it happen. So I will talk to the brass and get the approval. I'm sure I can make that happen. And so don't worry, boss. We'll get it taken care of. So you'll have something when you get here. We know where you guys live, so we'll get them back. And it was one of those things where they're like going to court, and when you never know what, like, are they going to get out? Or it's Murphy's Law, of course. Person got out, so they didn't end up coming back and bringing our shackles back. So our shackles are sitting in the trunk of a transport car that regularly comes and goes. So we'll get them back here soon. But it's just like, what the fuck? But he was eternally grateful. I know shit like that happens occasionally. It just seems like it's happening more than occasionally for this agency. And it's not just the officers, it's lieutenants now, and captains are shaking their heads. And I'm sure there's more than enough, more than a few sergeants like myself that are just shaking their heads like, what the fuck is going on? They're not putting the T in transport in that agency. I don't know what they got fucking going on. They got some crazy shit, but I made sure I grabbed some of our old school shackles. We have a lot of different styles. I grabbed some of the old school chain ones that had been etched, had our agency etched into them, so that they were easily identifiable, so they won't get lost in the mix. I was like, well, at least that way we can say those are in fact ours. They have our agency etched into the side, so they won't get mixed in with this other agencies. Had to let everybody know at our facility for the for our account is going to be off until we get these back. So we have another got notification we got a transport coming up this week, so we will get our shackles back. So all will be well when that happens. So I'm not sure when this episode will come out, because it's just Sunday early. The Bills are playing a Sunday night game, so had some time. Figured I would do a little batch record a couple episodes, so we have them for future use. So could be October when this comes out. It could be later. So hello from past me or future me, or who knows. But just wanted to do some timeless uh, episode here. I hope you like this light funnel here. My kids were messing around in the office and broke the LED light, so this will be my lighting situation here for a little while until I replace it. So Shorty Rides, for some reason, likes to be able to see my face, so I'm sure she'll like the key light. I was able to dial it back a little bit so it's not all fucking blurry. But yeah, casting a ominous shadow here. Got this like shotgun light style, kind of blurry edges. Kind of, I don't know, old school looking kind of like I'm maybe I'm being interrogated or something kind of look going on here. If you're watching, if you're not, if you're just listening, you're missing out on the aesthetics here. I have my grunt style corrections t-shirt on, so something a little different. I believe, depending on when you're listening to it, we still have the Hard Time merch store up, so you can get a Hard Time shirt, hoodies, mugs, koozies, all that good stuff. If John appreciates that, I appreciate your patronage. If you're listening to this early on, early access for our listeners, and also we have the Instagram chat group for our listeners. So I mean, we don't keep track and keep people off who aren't on, who aren't paying and stuff, but it's our hard timers group for those who are supporting the show. And I try to be supportive and, make sure that I'm dropping some comments and responding to you guys and stuff. So always appreciate that. Always appreciate the show ideas. If you have any stories that you want to throw our way, you can always do that. At Jake Motherfucker Welder, just like it says down in the corner. You can let me know if you have any ideas. If you're new to the show, I appreciate you listening in. TS Marine, he's been listening for a while, but just got recently getting shouted out. So appreciate you commenting. Helps the algorithm. So been doing this for a couple years. We're just doing it on the side, and John told me a while ago, like, hey, if you want this to grow, like, get ready for a part-time job. Like, you've got to like do YouTube, and you've got to like post regularly and do it like he does, like has been doing. Do it as a job, post, go live, do all the things and stuff. And with work and family, just haven't been able to dedicate that much time to it. Maybe here soon, I'll be able to start doing some more to encourage some growth here. But I appreciate everybody's support. It's really humbling that people in other countries are listening to my little podcast that John and I started just as two guys talking in a chat group, talking about jail shit. And now a couple of years later, you guys are still listening. I'm not shouting out into the ether. People are listening and responding, and that's pretty awesome. So thank you for your support. I do appreciate it. Well, we have this week have an interesting story. A Georgia inmate serving life mailed bombs from prison to D.C. office building and Alaska court. Feds charged. So we've got ourselves another Unabomber down in Georgia, but the man is a inmate, and he's got a couple interesting life choices besides being a lifetime fuck up, being a serving life in jail, being a classic piece of shit, just really loathsome human being, very few redeeming qualities, short little worm of a human being, just absolute piece of shit, and just continues to make poor choices. I mean, who would have thunk an inmate continuing to make poor choices? I mean, I'm not just talking about his hairstyle or little things that we can do that poor choices. Maybe he's maybe he just picks a bad NFL team or something like that. No, this guy decides to send bombs to, I don't know why he picked, sending stuff to Washington DC and Alaska. Maybe he's trying to prove a point. I'm in Georgia and I can reach out this far. I can reach out a long distance. I mean, they say he was protesting some stuff. We'll get into that. That's the point of this. It's always we don't like the food, and I don't like the color of my socks, and they're not long enough, and I don't like the elastic. And, it's always fucking stupid shit. Your life shrinks when you're in jail. Stupid little shit fucking bug you. It's like you're living in a fucking nursing home. They just bitch and moan and complain about stupid shit. uh, but just got some key points from the article here. This is from Dan Mangan from CNBC. It says a man serving a life sentence for kidnapping and other crimes while in Georgia in prison built 2 bombs which he mailed to District Columbia office building and a federal courthouse building in Anchorage, Alaska, prosecutors allege. The accused bomb maker, David Cassidy, not of Partridge Family fame, David Dwayne Cassidy. He doesn't have, the fabulous hair and sequins. He's short, which David Cassidy's not very tall, I don't think. Short, balding, and which I've got no room to talk there. He does not have a magnificent beard, and he short, bald, and yeah, just piece of shit. Not doesn't have any glamour headshots except the ones that were taken in booking. So we'll put it that way. He allegedly put 2 explosive devices into the mail at his prison in Tatnall County on January 24th, 2020, according to an indictment. Okay, so that's kind of a key thing that I missed. This happened back in 2020. So in 2020, a lot of things, weird shit happened in jail. Like, it was a weird fucking time. Like, either you had everybody locked down and you were extremely short staffed, and you had riots going on, and people were losing their fucking minds, and because they were all in mental distress because they were locked down 22 hours a day, and it was just your numbers were low for a lot of us because they were letting out everybody except like the ones that absolutely had to be in jail because everybody was afraid of the Rona. Or some places were fairly well staffed, and they didn't have a bunch of people, and they just didn't have a bunch of people in, and things were kind of okay, I guess. In some other places they didn't weren't dealing with as much stuff because of the lockdowns. um it was all right, but shit was weird in 2020. So that might kind of explain. um there was still a shortage of officers in a lot of places. That's part of the reason that I became a sergeant so easily, is nobody wanted the job in fucking 2020 because nobody wanted to show up to work. Everybody was fucking scared. And I was working 70 hours a week. And there were still a lot of weekly changes with all that shit because we had lockdowns and shit in my state. So unfortunately, even though I'm in the Southwest, it was not the Wild West. And even though I ignored as much of that shit as I could and was able to live my life mostly, work was a fucking nightmare. The third one, the bomb went to Washington, D.C., was mailed to the Bond building, whose office tenants the Department of Justice. So it's very possible he did some research and knew that. That could be, a happy accident because he might not be a huge criminal mastermind. I'm not sure. Um, it's very possible that he knew that because he did some pretty interesting things here. We've talked about some ingenuity, some kind of ingenious things that inmates have done with a lot of time. And credit where credit's due. He's done some stuff. He's a loathful, succubus human being, but um, he did some interesting shit here. Cassidy has a long criminal record dating back to the late 1980s when he was sentenced to prison for 3 years after convictions for 6 counts of first-degree forgery. And I wish his criminal record stopped there. We'll get into more of that, but right now, because that's where the article starts. If he had stopped at forgery, then I would not have so many things to say about him. He'd just be a David Abagnale. Like you want to catch me if you can, fine. You want to be a JD Delay, and forge a bunch of shit and rack up a bunch of felonies. You're just really good at crime shit. You want to do that for a while. I kind of, on one level, get it, man. I think a lot of people do. That's why crime movies are such a big hit, right? But then he decides to ruin a bunch of people's lives. A man serving a life sentence for kidnapping and other crimes, um, including sodomy and shit. While in a Georgia prison, built 2 bombs while he mailed to District Columbia office building and a federal courthouse in Anchorage, Alaska, prosecutors alleged. The accused bomb maker, 55-year-old David Dwayne Cassidy, allegedly put the 2 explosive devices into the mail at the prison on January 24th, 2020, according to indictment by grand jury in U.S. District Court in Statesboro, Georgia. The bomb that went to Washington, D.C. was mailed to the bomb building that tenants the Department of Justice. The indictment alleges Cassidy made and sent the bombs with the intent to maliciously damage or destroy by means of fire or explosive a building in whole or in part owned or possessed by or leased to the United States and created substantial risk of injury to a person. Neither bomb exploded. Cassidy is charged with 1 count of making an unregistered destructive device, 2 counts of mailing a destructive device, and 2 counts of attempted malicious use of an explosive. Protecting our personnel and facilities is a fundamental role of our office and of our law enforcement partners, said the U.S. Attorney Jill Steinberg, whose office is prosecuting Cassidy. We will also take action against inmates who seek to commit crimes to harm the public from behind bars. Well, that's good. That should be a large portion of your job. I hope you have a lot of fucking time. Barry Paschal, a spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney's Office, declined to comment when asked to explain more than 4-year lag between Cassidy allegedly mailing the bombs and being charged in the case. Well, he's not fucking going anywhere. He's already serving life. You're going to tack on a bunch of years. I get that we should go through the process and do it, but also the other part of me is it a waste of fucking time? Because it's just him. Paschal said he could not comment on the details of the case beyond those contained in the indictment. Charging document did not say how Cassidy allegedly made the bombs while locked in prison, the size of those devices, how he mailed them from prison, and why he chose the DOJ headquarters and the federal courthouse building as in Anchorage as his targets. So the federal courthouse was that second target. So that's the one. There's a lot of little details and stuff. That was kind of the largest article that talked about this. I have 3 more articles that have some smaller details that we can get into and discuss. The New York Post picked this up by the Associated Press. It does not credit anyone specifically. The title gives another detail. Trans Georgia inmate who made bombs and mailed them to DOJ gets 80-year sentence. Um, so, of course, the New York Post has to make it about a trans issue. So that's a detail we haven't gotten into yet. So this article reads, a person already in prison has been a person. I get why they're doing that for the gender sensitivity issue, um, but also a person is kind of a stretch for this piece of shit. Has been sentenced to 80 years in federal custody after authorities said the inmate built 2 bombs. At least they used inmate properly, not incarcerated person. That's good. Built 2 bombs while behind bars and mailed them to a federal courthouse in Anchorage, Alaska, and the Department of Justice. Federal prosecutors on Tuesday announced the sentence for the inmate authorities identified as David Dwayne Cassidy, 57 now, who was incarcerated in a state prison in Georgia when the devices were made, authorities said. The inmate pleaded guilty to 2 counts of malicious use of explosive materials. The inmate has severe anxiety and gender dysphoria, defense lawyer Tina Maddox wrote in sentencing memo to the court. The crimes were, quote, acts of desperation born out of unrelenting abuse, hopelessness, and mental distress, Maddox wrote. The defendant is a transgender woman and now goes by the name Lena Noel Summerlin, the lawyer said in the July 8th indictment. The indictment says both bombs were made in a state prison and mailed from the prison. Doesn't detail how the materials were obtained. This is a key detail, though. The bombs were functional and had the capabilities to explode, a plea agreement states. The inmate admitted to mailing them in retaliation for prison conditions, it said. Since the early 1990s, the inmate had been held in a variety of Georgia prisons after being convicted of more than a dozen crimes, including kidnapping and aggravated sodomy, according to records from the Georgia Department of Corrections. The department's devices were not only a threat to the recipients, but to every individual that unknowingly transported and delivered them, U.S. Attorney Brian Sterling said in a statement. The defendant intended to incite fear in the targets and among the public, said Rodney Hopkins, the inspector in charge of the Atlanta Division of the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. So they're going postal. They're fucking pissed off, and rightly so. So this person is now trans because he's fucking nuts. And obviously has a lot of fucking sexual issues and has chosen to I tried to look up his record to see if I could find what some of these dozen counts and stuff are, but obviously he's a rapist at best, possibly a pedophile, and yeah, likes to forcibly rape people. He's just a piece of shit, and now he wants to blame it on gender dysphoria. So it's just he's just misunderstood. So the document doesn't say how the materials were obtained. The materials, I understand, were obtained through commissary. He was able to figure out with enough time what items and stuff were not inert that he could get through commissary and through his jobs and stuff that he had at the jail. That's how he was able to obtain the materials for these bombs. It in some of these articles, they get into how included commissary items. So just underscores the, like sometimes they get pissed off, like, why don't we have coffee, or why don't we have soda, or why don't we have this, or why don't we have that on fucking commissary? Like, there's reasons that things get taken off commissary, and it's, I call it this, it's that asshole principle. Don't be that asshole. You're that asshole that gets something taken off commissary. This asshole got a bunch of shit taken off commissary because he found out that a bunch of different shit had stuff in it that you could use to make a fucking bomb, which is absolutely insane. Given enough time and enough ingenuity, he was able to make a fucking bomb in prison and mail it to government buildings, go full Unabomber from jail. Like, that's pretty fucking wild. I don't know, like I said, some of the other, things he may have gotten from different places in the jail. Obviously, like, firing, whatever you use to fire it and stuff, like some of the things of the devices he was able to get from things in jail. Again, he said but it was functional and had the capabilities to explode. He didn't just, put a bunch of shit in some food coloring in a couple bottles and tape it to a watch and, said, this is a bomb. In order to be charged, the bomb squad actually had to verify these things had the capabilities to explode and to harm anybody that was transporting them, because they were dangerous the entire time they were being transported. They were dangerous while they were being transported in those vehicles, while they were being transported on the roads, while they were being transported through the post offices, transporting the country. It's possible, you're just driving along next to a mail truck or flying in a plane, and you don't realize that the mail is part of the cargo on a plane, and somebody's got a fucking, bomb in it. Like, that's crazy. And yeah, we've established he's been, this was, I mean, I'm surprised he didn't get charged with, terroristic, with being charged as like a terrorist for this. But again, you go back and forth, like, is this going to, how much is this going to accomplish? This person is going to be in jail for the rest of his life. How much is this transgender Lena Noel Summerlin, supposedly now, going to be in jail, going to be miserable son of a bitch for the rest of his miserable life. But is going to be there. So, I mean, I get why they kind of slow walk the case, because it's going to be there his whole life. And what good does it accomplish to tack on a bunch of other stuff and go crazy into a trial? I mean, get it done as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, and move on. Like, make a point of following the process, doing what you need to do. But yeah. Retaliation, and they didn't give this guy a ton, I will say, going through and doing the research here. All they did was give him the quote, it was in retaliation for prison conditions. That's all the airtime they gave this guy. They did not give him a microphone and go nuts, allowing him to protest and get his word out, which is great. I think that's awesome that they didn't give him a platform to, and that's possibly what he wanted. Like, I want my day in court. I want to, go and air all my grievances with, the prison system and how life's unfair because I'm a piece of shit. I'm in jail and I don't like this and that, and I don't like the color of my socks, and the food is, my eggs were extra runny, and they know I like firm eggs, and whatever the fuck he wants to complain about after, forcibly raping a bunch of people. He thinks he deserves X, Y, and Z, which is a bunch of shit. But this this MSN here, there's another article by Ethan Coulter. It gets into a little bit of the details. It says that Cassidy was able to manipulate primarily items he was authorized to possess into makeshift explosive devices. And another key detail that he puts here is that the federal system has no parole system in Georgia. Since the federal person has no parole system, Cassidy will spend the rest of his natural life incarcerated. So that is the silver lining here. This piece of shit will never see the light of day. So if he, if they can keep this stuff locked down, now they know, keep this, watch his asshole's mail. Which you should have been doing in the first place. No excuses for that. But they tacked on 80 additional years now. But he pled guilty to that. But as long as they keep his mail locked down and stuff, then they will be he will not be able to cast his darkness outside of the prison that he resides, whichever prison that happens to be in the state of Georgia, or if they do an interstate compact, because that's always possible. They could take him out of Georgia and put him somewhere else. It might, for someone that's disingenuous, it might be good to move him around from time to time, so that he doesn't get too comfortable in one place and understand things, be able to manipulate the system, and get into doing shit like this. So that's one story that I had. I joke a lot that in jail I used to say, when people would taking them down to chow, and they are allowed to talk, but they're supposed to keep conversation to a minimum, which a minimum when you're, in jail and they're not supposed to talk, they talk a fucking lot. They talk more than ever because they know they're not supposed to. I would say, can't we have one meal as a family without fucking arguing, when people would start to get out of hand. So I've kind of, I'm looking at, what the description for this episode and what the title of this episode, but it's kind of like the Partridge Family connection with the David Cassidy, and like, aren't we one big family? And talking about like the interstate compacts. This next case gets into that, an interstate compact with some inmates and a fight that happens. Sometimes fights happen in families, and sometimes fights happen and they involve Latinas and people get cut. And in this case, it wasn't a Latina, but somebody got cut. So this is from Corrections 1 investigations. This is actually came from the Santa Fe, New Mexican. Daniel J. Chacon wrote the original article. Inmate fatally stabbed in, quote, racially motivated prison fight at New Mexico facility. A racially motivated prison fight? Never heard of such a thing. Being facetious, of course, they break themselves up into tribes in jail, like, it's the fucking 1600s. I don't know why. And then they say that all the officers are racist. The fight at the Northeast New Mexico Correctional Facility began after injured inmates shouted threats, promising a second wave of violence that ended with an inmate stabbed in the chest. September 15, 2025. Clayton, New Mexico. A fight involving close to 30 inmates of the state-run Northeast New Mexico Correctional Facility in Clayton resulted in the stabbing death of a prisoner September 2nd. New Mexico State Police allege in a statement of probable cause video surveillance footage and witness statements implicate Max Aragon, 32, as the individual who stabbed, in quotes, 48-year-old Anibal Ortiz during the deadly melee. Aragon, who had been charged with second-degree murder in connection with the slaying, had been in the custody of the State Department of Corrections since August 2014 on a 19-year sentence for armed robbery with a deadly weapon, residential burglary, and fleeing a police officer. Ortiz, an inmate from Hawaii being held in New Mexico through an interstate compact, because we're one big happy family, remember that, was stabbed twice, once in the left tricep and the second fatal wound in the left side of the chest. So tricep, chest. As Ortiz reached the bottom of the tier of EPOD, inmate Max Aragon confronted him and made the two stabbing motions towards Ortiz, who immediately clutched his chest, bent at the waist in apparent pain, document state. Adding, Ortiz tried to walk back up the stairs a few minutes later, but collapsed at the top tier before an inmate dragged him into a cell. The manner of death was ruled a homicide. I'll pause here for a second. I thought this was interesting because it quotes a lot of the quotes and stuff in it are from a very well written report. So it kind of gives you a glimpse into, I'm making light of the stabbing and, the gestures and like how it's written and stuff, but it's very, very well written. And, it needs to be. It's a fucking homicide case. So, but it, the officers that wrote the report and did the investigation did a very good job. Well, having a stabbing happen is never ideal. Who was there? Could they prevented things? Is that, I don't know how about all that stuff though. But the article continues. A spokesperson for the New Mexico State Police said earlier this week officers responded to the facility in regard to an inmate death at about 11:30 p.m. on September 2nd, which the probable cause statement indicates would be about 3.5 hours after the incident. Police interviewed the correctional staff and 62 inmates as part of their investigation. That had to be fun. 62 fucking inmate in interviews. Jesus. I could just imagine fucking I haven't read this article in detail, and I could just imagine it. And then the next sentence just gives you a picture. The majority of the inmates refused to cooperate, and those who did provided limited information. Documents state staff recovered 3 homemade shanks. So there was a shakedown. In an email, Corrections Department spokesperson Brittany Rombach wrote the department was continuing to investigate Ortiz's death, which occurred during an inmate-on-inmate fight, which involved more than a dozen inmates. She wrote she could not comment on specifics due to the ongoing investigation, but generally, when such incidents of this nature occur within the prison setting, groups tend to stay together. Tribalism. Assholes of a feather flock together. It's not in the article, but it's true. All state prison facilities were placed on lockdown after the fight, which is standard procedure because assholes of a feather flock together. She wrote, she didn't write that. The Northeast New Mexico prison and Southern New Mexico correctional facility were on lockdown, she wrote. Quote, "It's on." The incident started a smaller fight in the so-called Bravo pod. Bravo. Indeed. Lieutenant Timothy Hernandez, who works for the Corrections Department, told state police he was notified of a fight in that pod during the graveyard shift. He and another officer responded and deployed OC spray to try to control the situation, documents state. During this response, 3 inmates were escorted out of the pod with apparent injuries. These inmates were fully unrestrained and remained in the housing unit control area where they were able to yell toward the inmates inside, known as E-Pod. These inmates, who are African American, began yelling to other inmates. "They jumped us. Mexicans, Burquinos jumped us. It's on," documents state. Moments later, a larger fight broke out inside E-Pod. Video surveillance showed a group of 7 African American inmates gathered at what documents call E-Pod fire door. At the same time, 3 inmates who are Mexican American or New Mexican descent gathered on the top tier near a cell. Within a minute, both groups met near a cell door and appeared to exchange words. A fight between Aragon and another African American inmate ensued. Immediately, a large-scale altercation erupted, according to the probable cause statement, which describes inmates making stabbing motions. A lot of that, I'm sure. The footage shows Aragon making 2 stabbing motions towards Ortiz. Ortiz collapsed and was dragged into a cell by one of the African American inmates. Ortiz was carried out on a gurney and later pronounced dead, and it should be at an area hospital. Aragon was transferred to the restricted housing unit after the altercation. He refused to speak with agents. So they were trying to do their internal investigation. Police reported observing a small laceration on Aragon's left pointer finger, a bloody lip, and blood on his underwear and shoes, as well as a large bloody handprint on his pants. The cause of Ortiz's death was determined to be a sharp force injury to the chest, documents state. So, the blood, defensive wound, or the wound probably from the implement on his finger, because when you stab somebody, oftentimes you stab yourself. It's with a well-made knife, not with a shiv. With a shiv, it's shank. It's even worse. Bloody lip, probably Aragon fought back, and the bloody handprint, could have been him again trying to fight back. Ortiz claimed innocence. Ortiz, described by the Honolulu Star Bulletin as a former New Yorker, was accused of shooting and killing another man at a baseball field in Honolulu in 2002, 3 days before the victim was set to be married. Witnesses say the two may have argued about the victim disturbing Ortiz's possessions, the newspaper reported. Both were homeless at the time and hung out at the bleachers at night. It was a homeless romance, and he was going to get married. I mean, he can still get married in jail. Ortiz claimed his innocence, and his public defender argued he had been set up for the murder. At his sentencing hearing, Ortiz continues to profess his innocence, the newspaper reported. He apologized to his family, to the victim, for the inconvenience he had caused them, and said he was sorry that they believed he killed their son, one report said. Yeah, it's awfully inconvenient when you kill someone. What a piece of shit. Oh, so what a fucking night in New Mexico for those officers to go from one pod having a fight to shouting to another pod to shouting to another pod. So, John has described that before, grave shift. just one thing after the other, just fucking popping off, being absolutely fucking nuts. Like what? And I can imagine the investigation, 62 inmates or whatever it was, um, trying to wrangle all those people and talk to them separately, interview them separately, doing all the shakedowns and everything, going from grave shift. Nobody went home that night, um, staying over into days. Everything on days was late. And yeah, the fuck storm, finding out that a death happened, having to report that and all that stuff. I really feel for the people there and um, in New Mexico dealing with that situation. It's never great to deal with a homicide, of course, but what the fuck? Just crazy. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming along on this wild ride with me. It's been an interesting episode of Hard Time here. Um, I hope John is able to return and do another episode with me. It'd be nice to get the game back together to do an episode, but occasionally you have these ones with just me. I think there's a couple really cool stories, kind of giving you like some a really in-depth look into the fucked up life of a corrections officer, like a detailed look into a really, really bad night. Undoubtedly one of the worst nights, or maybe it doesn't break the top 10 for those officers in New Mexico. And kind of a law-abiding citizen kind of night for our time back in 2020. Like just the kind of crazy shit inmates get up to when you're not paying attention. So even if you're dealing with something as banal as mail, make sure you're checking the fucking mail. So, for tonight's Jake joke, I'll tell you about a girl I heard about on OnlyFans. She made millions selling soup she made from her old, ripped up, torn clothes. That's what you call a true rags to riches story. Okay. Uh, all right. Thank you again for listening. We'll catch you again on another episode of Hard Time. And for me, I'll say good night, Jake.